Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. This is a trade war. The words of Canada's Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacting to Donald Trump's 25% import tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, and his own country. Justin Trudeau telling a press conference in Ottawa that the U.S. president wants to see, quote, a collapse of the Canadian economy because that would make it easier to annex us.
Canadians are reasonable and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time.
Trudeau warns it's going to be tough, promising support for Canadian workers and businesses, adding that they'll be taking measures in Ottawa to prevent predatory behavior that threaten Canadian companies. There's shock on both sides of the Atlantic. Over there on tariffs, as we're seeing here, over the freezing of military aid to Ukraine. That's just the latest in a downward spiral between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, one that was on full display last Friday with that showdown at the White House. Andrew Hillier has more.
Donald Trump gave little away when asked why Washington had decided to suspend its aid to Ukraine.
I could give you an answer and go back to my office, the beautiful Oval Office. I could go back into the Oval Office and find out that the answer is obsolete.
There were no details about how much aid would be impacted, nor how long the pause would last. According to a non-partisan budget committee, the US Congress has approved $179 billion in aid to Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion 3 years ago. That's less than figures quoted by Donald Trump, who says that Washington has given more aid than Europe, a false claim according to the Kiel Institute. But Washington is the biggest single contributor. A large part of the aid is actually spent in the US itself, replenishing stocks of ammunitions in factories that ship weapons to Ukraine. According to the American Enterprise Institute, the aid finances the arms industry in more than 70 US towns and cities. The list of weapons is long and includes infantry supplies, Abrams tanks, surface-to-air missiles, artillery shells, advanced radar systems, and even cluster munitions banned under international law. The decision to suspend aid could impact former President Joe Biden's promise to supply Kyiv with long-range missiles. It's also unknown whether the US will continue to share intelligence with Ukraine. Beyond military aid, the money is used to help pay Ukrainian government employees. It also provided financing to support Ukraine's public services, using USAID to distribute the money, the US government's foreign aid arm, which Donald Trump's administration is currently dismantling.
And for more, let's cross to Kyiv and correspondent Emmanuel Chaz. Emmanuel, we've just had a tweet from the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, saying that the showdown last Friday was, quote, regrettable, and it's time to make things right.
Absolutely. So in his address on social media, President Zelensky said that nobody more than Ukraine wanted peace and that he was ready to implement a truce in the sky, a ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy infrastructure and other civilian infrastructure, as well as a truce at sea if Russia will do the same. Once again, Volodymyr Zelensky points out that, in fact, there is one country that is victim of an aggression, which is Ukraine, and one aggressor there, which is Russia. Ukraine can want a truce from that moment onwards. If Russia wants it as well, there will be a truce. And that is actually a moment of truth here in Ukraine, because if indeed the Kremlin accepts this, there will be a truce. If it doesn't, it will prove to the world, to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as well, that in fact the aggressor and the party that is not interested in peace at this hour is Russia and not Ukraine.
And what are more broadly reactions to people you've been speaking with this Tuesday?
Well, I think it's been a few days now. It's fair to say that Ukrainians were expecting such bad news as what they got today when they heard that the US was pausing its military help to Ukraine. People are worried for two reasons. First, because this military aid, we've just heard in the reports, it goes on the front line, be it in the form of ammunition, in the form of intelligence, in the form of vehicles, secured vehicles. All of that, if it's not delivered to the front line, will make things much harder for soldiers on the front line. That being said, the soldiers I could talk to were maybe disillusioned, but also they said they would still keep on fighting. And Ukrainian soldiers have been on that front line, not just since 2022, but since 2014, and more often than not without American help, and they would continue to do so, though at a probably much higher price, a price that will be.
All right, we seem to have lost the connection there, unfortunately, with Kyiv. Emmanuel Chaz reporting. For more, let's cross now over to what this means what this means in terms concretely for Ukraine. Antonia Kerrigan has a look at that.
A never so conciliatory message from President Zelensky, hoping to salvage relations with Washington after President Trump asked him to leave the White House on Friday and announced the suspension of US military aid to Kyiv on Monday.
My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive.
Adding that Ukraine are ready, at Washington's convenience, to sign a $350 billion deal allowing the US to exploit rare earth metals in the country. This in the hope of tightening ties and locking in support for Kyiv. The Ukrainian premier insists that their troops can hold firm on the battlefield even without American supplies. But Kyiv also fears that without an urgent rapprochement between the countries, they may be forced to accept a US-negotiated peace with Russia on Moscow's terms, forcing them to surrender swathes of land. Out with the political sphere, the suspension of US aid has outraged Ukrainians.
It's like a stab in the back, because we were counting on them. We are counting on them, and it's, I don't know, somehow wrong, I think.
Our president stood up for our independence. We've been fighting for 3 years now. The US was one of our most important partners, and now they're turning their backs on us. That's not right.
Washington has been Kyiv's #1 donor since the Russian invasion in 2022. Shipments so far worth $65.9 billion, including state-of-the-art Patriot air defense systems, modern American tanks, and vast quantities of ammunition.
And for more, let's cross to London and journalist Philip Ingram, a former British military intelligence officer. Thanks for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
First off, how long can Ukraine hold out with this pause in U.S. help?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's almost how long is a piece of string. I think Ukraine can hold out for quite a period of time. We remember last year whenever the Republican leader of the House refused to have a vote to release $60 billion of US aid to Ukraine. And that went on for months and months and months and effectively stopped any US aid getting into Ukraine. Ukraine held out for a lot of that time. Ukraine can buy time by trading territory and still inflicting huge casualties on the Russians. The only thing we can guarantee is that this stop in US aid will lead to more deaths, not fewer.
More deaths, but we heard we saw Zelensky's tweet this Tuesday, calling it regrettable. He's trying to patch things up. However, later there's going to be this address by Donald Trump before a joint session of Congress. The damage is done.
Well, the damage is done, but I think it was pre-planned. I think it was set up looking at what's happening. And one of the key indicators for that is J.D. Vance was the attack dog. This isn't the vice president's area of responsibility. That is Marcus Rubio. Marcus Rubio was sitting on the sofa beside him in the Oval Office and said nothing. It's the Secretary of State's responsibility to deal with foreign policy. It's the J.D. Vance's responsibility tends to be domestic politics inside the United States. So this is where there are some very unusual things happening inside US politics. And the real motivation behind it, I don't think, is completely clear. There are a number of different theories as to why that should happen. We have to see what Donald Trump's reaction is going to be to Zelensky's very conciliatory statement this afternoon that he's put out and saying he's ready to come back to the negotiating table again. That's what Trump had asked him to do. So, but I think Trump has already decided what he's going to bring out in this statement this evening. And I think that will hit the headlines even more tomorrow morning and across Europe.
Hit the headlines and the suspension of the military aid. Of course, all of this brings at the same time in some of the other reactions. Stay with us, Philip Ingram, because we're going to look at some of the reactions on this side of the Atlantic, and the French Prime Minister coming out swinging in a hearing before the French Senate, François Picard, saying suspending aid during a war to a country under attack means abandoning that country and accepting or hoping that the aggressor will win. Meanwhile, over in Brussels, they're trying to figure out how to make up the shortfall that's coming in military aid for Ukraine.
In a drastic response to Washington suspending aid to Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen laid out her vision of how the EU could become a defence powerhouse.
Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilise close to 800 billion euros of defence expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe.
The proposal would be mostly funded by member states' own budgets. Using the so-called National Escape Clause, defence spending would be exempt from the bloc's budgetary rules, so that member states may spend on defence without fearing punishing proceedings if their deficit exceeds 3% of GDP.
So if member states would increase their defence spending by 1.5% of GDP on average, this could create fiscal space of close to 650 billion euros over a period of 4 years.
To make up the target 800 billion euros, the European Commission President also proposed a new loan instrument, a 150 billion euro fund that member states could borrow from to build up their arsenals of artillery and air defence, including to be sent to Ukraine. Under the proposals, the EU's so-called cohesion funds, money allocated for levelling up standards of living in deprived regions of Europe, could be repurposed for defence spending. Finally, von der Leyen is eyeing private funds. Further billions she hopes to mobilise through a savings union and the European Investment Bank. European leaders will discuss these and other proposals on Thursday at an extraordinary meeting of the European Council, focused on defence and the war in Ukraine.
And we're in the company of Philip Ingram, former British officer from London, and our Brussels correspondent, Dave Keating, who now joins us from the Belgian capital, from the European capital. Dave, a lot of this you were telling me before we went on air is stuff that's been announced before. You did hear in that report, though, this instrument for borrowing money, 150 billion euros. Is that new?
Well, this is all kind of stuff that's been worked on. So it's new in the fact that it hasn't happened yet, but these aren't new ideas. And already, for instance, the drop on the fiscal debt rules that would allow countries to violate spending rules in order to spend on defense, that was, the opposition to that was basically already been dropped by Germany. Von der Leyen had proposed it. In addition, when it comes to allowing the European Investment Bank, the new funds that you're referencing there, to invest in defense, that's already been in the works. I think the point was to put this all together as a package that the leaders can sign up to on Thursday, or at least discuss. It looks like something. It looks like they're reacting to the ending of funding overnight, that announcement coming from Washington. But it also is serving to kind of distract from the lack of more immediate assistance that they were trying to do, that they were hoping to do. So it's new things, but it's not necessarily things that weren't already in the works.
And Dave, having a summit like the one we saw where Philip is in London on Sunday among people who are of the same view, that's easy. Hosting one this coming Thursday with, I guess, what you could call the awkward squad on this one, Hungary, Slovakia, that's going to be hard.
Yeah, exactly. And already we're hearing that Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban is vetoing this attempt to have 20 billion euros more sent to Ukraine right away to help them very much in the short term. Now, they're still working on that. There's 2 days left. And so they're trying to find some way to overcome that opposition from Hungary. I think any hope of actually convincing Orban to end his veto on that has been dropped. But there are ways around it. It is the case in the Council that even on these issues that require unanimity, there are ways around it. They've done it in the past, but the national capitals don't like to do it because it sets a precedent that dilutes national power, hands more power to the EU, and they don't like it. They may have no choice here because while if they have a conclusions on all of these measures on Thursday, that might look like success. Everything that Ursula von der Leyen announced this morning are long-term measures. And when it comes to the short-term help that Ukraine needs because of the loss of American assistance, unless they come to some kind of agreement on that on Thursday, that's a really serious black hole that Ukraine is facing in the short term.
Philip Ingram, let me ask you about these workarounds and about really what Dave is talking about. It brings us back to last Sunday because it's kind of working on how do you do NATO without the United States? And there's the EU on the one hand, and then there's the likes of the UK, Norway, Canada.
Well, NATO has got a plan to be able to plan and control operations without the United States. That is why the Deputy Supreme Commander was always a British officer. So Supreme Commander, a US officer, Deputy Supreme Commander, British officer. That was thrown into difficulty when the UK left the EU, but that British officer was there to command NATO operations if the United States decided they didn't want to be part of it. So there is a framework there for that to happen. And now is the time for that to be properly refined. And I would hope that in our national capitals across Europe and in Canada, we have to remember Canada is a member of NATO as well, that the planning's going in to see how it could be restructured if the Americans decide either to withdraw completely, which I don't think they will do, but to step back from the leadership of NATO so that they can focus and concentrate on their national activities elsewhere, which I think may be in the statement from Donald Trump this evening. I'm speculating purely here.
Wow, that could be in the statement. Events are moving fast, Philip Ingram. When you look at last Sunday in London, that summit hosted by Keir Starmer, when you look at next Thursday, the EU summit that's happening, are things moving fast enough?
Yes, things are moving fast politically. There's an awful lot of talk. The things that do not move fast and cannot move fast are all of the financial changes that are coming in, but they're probably the fastest to implement. The next, which is much more difficult, is getting the defense industrial base to a level where it can meet the outputs that are required for the current conflict, never mind building up stocks for anything else. And that takes years. And then it's generating the military capability across all of the different countries to the levels that are going to be needed to carry out operations without the integration of the United States. And that will take tens of years to go through. And therefore, we are, and I include the UK in my description of Europe here, caught with our proverbial pants around our ankles.
Dave Keating, NATO is host to, NATO's headquarters are in Brussels, where you are. It's got a new Secretary General, the former longtime Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who, when he got the job, was tipped as the guy who knew how to whisper in Trump's ear. What's he been saying this week? Will he just follow along, or is he making those contingency plans?
well, he doesn't really look like someone who's whispering in Trump's ear. He looks more like somebody who's following the orders of Donald Trump. I mean, it was notable to a lot of people that he suggested this week that in order to solve this impasse from the Oval Office fight last week, that Zelensky needs to apologize to Donald Trump, that basically it was on the onus of Zelensky to try to repair that relationship. I think there's been a lot of frustration with Mark Rutte, actually, because he has really towed the American line, and he doesn't look like he's doing so gladly. He has a kind of Marco Rubio face when he's having to defend the Trump administration, but he is at the helm of a institution, NATO, which is American dominated, and so he's not in a very easy position there. But I don't think anyone here in Brussels is now looking at Mark Rutte as some kind of savior for Europe. I think his positioning here has kind of made him seem like a bit of an irrelevance.
And more broadly, Dave, what's the mood right now in Brussels?
Pretty pessimistic, I would say. There isn't huge hope that the summit on Thursday is going to make huge breakthroughs. So we'll see. I think everyone is quite nervous, quite scared, kind of in a sense of disbelief. I think that this morning, von der Leyen's press statement, she was speaking so dramatically about these are unprecedented times, speaking of the horrors that might be coming if Europe doesn't get ready. I mean, it was the most serious language I've heard her use about the situation we're in as of yet, and that is language I'm hearing from all people right now.
Philip Ingram in London, feels like mostly a moment of national unity. Between the Labour and the Conservative benches we saw when there was that briefing before Parliament by the Prime Minister on Monday. The UK and France are the two countries with the bomb on this side of the Atlantic. Is it up to that couple to drive things forward?
I'm afraid it is, and it's the UK and France are also both members, permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. So it is up to both countries to stand up and lead this coalition of the willing, and that's not anything new. Every operation that we've been involved in over all of the time that I can think of has always been a coalition of the willing, whether it's under a NATO framework, whether it's under a lead nation framework, whether it's under something else. So it's easy to think that a lot of this is new. A lot of it isn't, but the new bit is the dynamics of the politics and the US stepping back, and that's what's causing real anxiety.
Real anxiety, plus, as you said at the outset, those Kremlin talking points used inside of the Oval Office. Is that ignorance, or is there more to it?
It could be one or the other. Trump has got a very senior team. His J.D. Vance has got no geopolitical experience whatsoever. He walked all over Marco Rubio in the Oval Office. Pete Hegseth, his defense secretary, has got no experience leading that size of a department. His new director of national intelligence has got no intelligence experience whatsoever. Elon Musk, who's running roughshod through every US government department, has got no governmental experience at all. And therefore, it could be people misinterpreting and coming out with the wrong language. But then, of course, there are always the rumors that Trump and Putin are closer in ways that people don't like. And the trouble is, we just don't know.
Dave Keating, one final question before we wrap this all up. The difference of perspective when it comes to the war in Ukraine, Ukraine's border much closer to where you and I are sitting, to where they are in the U.S. Right now. Is it difficult to explain it to Americans?
It is, yeah, and I think we saw that happen in the Oval Office exchange when Zelensky said something about you have an ocean between you, but you will feel this, and Trump reacted so violently to that, saying, don't tell us what we're going to feel. But I can say, I'm American, and when I speak to the people I know back in my home country, the Ukraine war has never felt like an urgency for them. It became very much a political divide, that if you were a Democrat, you were supporting Ukraine, if you were a Republican, you weren't, and it's become such a political issue, and it's really not looked at as some kind of existential issue about their safety there. Very, very different to how we look at it here in Europe.
Dave Keating in Brussels, I want to thank you. I want to thank Philip Ingram in London for joining us. There's more to come, including the latest reactions to Trump slapping tariffs on allies, Canada and Mexico. Stay with us. You're watching France 24.